Dr. Scott Kolbaba, thank you for joining me this morning and welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. I'm super excited to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Before we jump into our topic, I know we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself, what work you do, and what's brought you here today.
I'm a general doc. I see adult patients. I've been in practice for more years than I'd like to admit, a little over 40 years. I know I look much younger than that, of course, but I started when I was in kindergarten. I enjoy practicing medicine. I'm still going full strong. I work in the Northwestern Medicines at CDH Adolescent Psych Unit, which has gotten me interested in the adolescent psych issue and the epidemic of depression, and especially in young girls today.
Mm-hmm.
I've got 7 kids. I'm not sure where they all came from. We have a lot of fun. Every year we take a vacation and we do crazy things on the vacation. This year we're going to Branson, Missouri. We rented a big house for 28. So we'll all the kids look forward to that every year. So we have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
I like big things. I have a big dog, 150-pound Newfoundland. I fly big kites. We have a couple kites that the kids like to fly, and we like to have the biggest kite on the beach. Not that we're competitive at all, of course. And I got involved with the epidemic of depression when I took care of a little girl, 13 years old, in the emergency room.
Mm.
She'd overdosed on her mother's pills, and I walked in the room, and there she was, still as death, comatose from a drug overdose. Mom was holding her hands, is just absolutely sobbing,
Mm.
and we got her going after intubation and pumping her stomach, the usual things we do for an overdose like that, and she survived. But I was moved by that. You think the doctors are aloof and so forth. We feel for our patients. And I really got involved with her, and it changed me. And I decided to do something to see if I could do anything about this what we're seeing even in our little area
Mm-hmm.
of girls, especially getting depressed and committing suicide. So I wrote a book called Clara's Magic Garden about a little girl that, like most little girls, doesn't think she's pretty, doesn't think she has enough friends, doesn't think she has the right clothes and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately, through the story, she gets changes and becomes more confident, and her depression kind of eases, and she's a happy girl, grows up and has kids of her own. So it was a fun book, and I'm now out, promoting the book, and I'm trying to promote the fact that what I think is the most important thing for preventing and treating teen depression is finding your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't cost anything. It's something that we can all parents can do, significant others can do, uncles can do, whatever. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But that's I think one of the things that doesn't cost anything, and it makes a huge difference. I think, and will make a big difference if people begin to realize that. That's where I'm at and what I'm about.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing all that, and thank you for shedding light on what you've described as the epidemic here in terms of depression. Now, before we jump to, as you alluded to, the antidote and perhaps helping people find that purpose, let's talk about some of the causes here. So, I think for most people, we're aware of depression. We have more we have the capability now to term it as such because we have a better understanding in today's world, which I think can cause problems too, because then people tend to use that as something to debilitate themselves, right? If I feel depressed, that's it. And I can't do anything about it. So do you see a lot of that where people will often use depression as a way to almost as an excuse to not navigate through it, whereas in the past you didn't know what it was, so you just powered through it in a way.
Depression is a situation where people are hopeless and
Mm-hmm.
don't realize that there's a solution in many cases. I'm the depressed person feels that they're worthless. They would be better off in many cases not around, that they're a burden to society, they're a burden to their families.
Hmm.
So it's hard to break out of that. That's a swirling spiral down, and that's what we're seeing. I don't know if it's an excuse, but it's the way depression is. When we see kids that are depressed, the kinds of things that you want to look for would be a loss of interest in outside activities. They're not hanging out with their friends anymore. They're going up to their room, closing the door, sleeping a lot, either eating too much or eating too little. Usually for me, it's if I get into a bad situation, I head for the refrigerator, and I
Hmm.
think many people do. But it's a change in appetite, a loss of interest in hobbies. They don't want to play football anymore. They don't want to do the things that they loved to do before. Eye contact is a big one. They're not going to make eye contact as much. They're looking at the floor, and then the thing that I always have to ask, and anyone that's involved in mental health, is, have you thought about suicide? And I'm shocked sometimes to hear the answer to that. And the second question after that is, if they say yes, do you have a plan? How would you do it? And if they have a plan, that's really significant. Then those are the kids in trouble. I saw a kid yesterday, for example, that was profoundly depressed, and he was thinking about suicide. And I said, "Do you have a plan?" And he said, "Well, I want to do something that's not going to hurt me."
Hmm.
He really didn't have a significant plan. I had another kid that I saw, young fellow, that was considering suicide. Now, when you talk to people and interview them for whatever reason, and anyone can do this, and this kid seemed to be doing perfectly well, but some of the answers that you get can be absolutely shocking. I said, "Have you ever considered suicide?" He said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "Do you have a plan?" And he said, "The other day I went into my father's study, and he has a gun in his drawer. I took the gun out, and there's some bullets locked in the other drawer, and I opened that up and loaded the gun, and then I decided not to do anything and put it all away." That's a kid that's in big trouble and needs to be getting help, and probably getting in the psych unit immediately. So
Hmm.
those are the things to ask for. So, and those are the things to look out for when you see a kid that's in trouble or
Yeah.
maybe acting depressed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely in the clinical setting. You have to understand if the individual is truly at threat, if they've gone through and developed a plan, because that's where they can easily execute it. Where
Yes.
if there's no plan, then most people do have those thoughts of suicide from time to time, especially as you mentioned, if there is depression going on, but that's where it stops. It doesn't
Yes.
go beyond that. So I appreciate you dis- creating that distinction there. Now, you touched on the aspect of girls, especially experiencing depression. Why do you think that's happening? And and when you and I chatted, we've seen this number go up post pandemic. So perhaps if you can elaborate on that, I think there'd be
Sure.
a value for us to understand.
Yeah, the CDC keeps statistics on depression. Some of these statistics you have to take a little bit with a grain of salt, but what they're saying is that uh, um, clearly 3 out of 5 girls, teenage girls these days, have gone through a depression. That's a huge number. One third, 30%, 33%, have actually seriously considered suicide. That's huge. Boys are about half that or less. And what's the difference between boys and girls? I think girls are more sensitive to things, and that gets back to what are the causes of depression. And the causes of depression are a number of things. Social media, I think, is one of the biggest ones. And on social media, that that's I think was exacerbated by the pandemic, because everyone was on social media during the pandemic, and I think that's continued. And what can happen in social media is that people can say things that they wouldn't say to you face to face.
Right.
And bullying is a huge issue. The CDC again estimates that people that are bullied have between 2 and 9 times the rate of suicide compared to people that aren't bullied. And so that's a big one on social media. The other thing that happens on social media is you see everyone that's perfect. You see the perfect vacation, the perfect clothes, life, and no one has anything perfect. And
Mhm.
people that try to display everything that's perfect in their life and one up everyone else. And so I think parents and significant others need to emphasize that the stuff that you're seeing on social media is frequently not the case. And girls are sensitive to hairstyles and clothes and all those kinds of things. I think they're much more sensitive than guys, which I think puts girls in a higher risk bracket for suicide and depression.
Mhm.
The interesting thing, though, about girls and depression is that girls have a much higher incidence of depression than boys, but boys have a much higher incidence of death from suicide,
Mhm.
4 times the number of boys actually commit suicide compared to girls. And I think the reason for that is many, and the girls that we see in the psych unit, for example, will come in with cuts on their arms, reaching out for help, and make gestures like they'll take an overdose of some pills, but then they'll call their girlfriend or they'll text someone and say, I've just overdosed. And so they really don't want to carry out the act.
Mhm.
Whereas boys that that are a little bit different than the girls will be quiet for quite some time and then all of a sudden act. And the big ones are firearms. That's the most common cause of suicide, firearms, and then things like hanging, and then overdoses are the big ones. And guys are, again, 4 times more likely to actually carry it out and accomplish suicide compared to girls.
Mhm.
Girls are very sensitive. I think they are trying to get attention a little bit more than the boys are. Other things that we see as far as causes of this depression, in addition to social media and bullying, would be academic pressure.
Mhm.
It's a lot more. When I was a kid, we weren't scheduled as rigorously as we are now. All the kids are expected to play 2 or 3 sports, to be involved with all kinds of extracurricular activities, to be involved with academics. What's interesting is right now in our psych unit, we have about 2 or 3 kids versus 16. And summertime. In summertime, we actually close the psych unit. So there's a tremendous academic stress as a cause of depression. And once the school starts again, the psych unit fills up. It's just very interesting. The other thing that we're seeing today is the the influence of the home. Everyone's in trouble. This inflation has caused a serious uh, uh, a serious problem in the home situation because one of the most common causes of divorce in families is money. And people are struggling. We've got 2 people working and they're struggling to make ends meet. And the stresses at home are a significant problem for the kids. They feel it. And, and so that's another big aspect of the cause of depression. A couple other things would be just the genetics. Whenever I interview one of the kids in the psych unit, I'll ask, is there anyone in the family that has a depression? And
Mhm.
that's commonly the case. You'll see, oh, my dad is depressed, my grandmother committed suicide, things like that are very common. So those are some of the big ones. And like I said, the girls seem to be much more affected than the boys in
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, no, thank you for building on that. And I think girls biologically, I know you said sensitive, but they're also sensitive to negative emotion, right? So when you experience that negative emotion, then it's you can internalize it a lot quicker than for the boys, right?
Yep. You hear the expression, the sticks and stones will break my bones, but words won't harm me, but words are incredibly harmful.
Hmm.
And kids remember those negative comments. There was a girl that became a representative in Ohio for one of the large hospital units, and she was in charge of social media. and she would get things like, I don't believe in the pandemic. I think you're awful. I hate you, those kinds of things. And she couldn't take it after a while. She finally decided to give up the position and and just not be part of that because
Mhm.
words are very powerful and be very hurtful.
Yeah, and there's another thing you touched on, which I think we start to see a lot more in adult life as well, where men struggle to talk about their emotions and whatever they're struggling with, whereas women tend to socialize a bit more and share those aspects of their lives. Are you seeing that with the children too? I know you touched on the fact that, for example, girls will call their girlfriends and
Mhm.
ask for help, whereas the boys tend to act through their plan when it comes to suicide. So is that kind of the same idea there, where there's that sense of isolation for the men that we see as adults too? That's why the suicide numbers are so high for men as well.
That's true. Men tend to be quiet. They don't tend to talk about it. And you have to admit there's still a stigma
Mhm.
associated with mental illness. It's unfortunate, but if you admit to being depressed or have some psych problems, people consider that a stigma. It goes on your record. It follows you, and so people, especially the boys, are hesitant to admit that. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, they're committing suicide.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. That's why there's 4 times the incidence of suicide with boys than there are with girls.
Yeah. And I think there's an aspect of depression can often be viewed as a weakness. So there could be that added element there by admitting that I'm struggling with depression. You're probably stating that I'm also experiencing some sort of weakness, right? And that's what can be perceived by your peers, especially in the school system, when it's
Yes.
so hard, especially for boys, right? Where they're,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's no question that there is peer pressure, which is one of the causes of a depression. Again, and if people admit to being depressed, that can be a source of bullying and trouble for the boy that admits that. So that's true. Girls are more likely to admit that because it's not as much peer pressure, and it's getting better, but it still exists out there, and we're trying to make mental illness a condition that is okay to have and it's okay to treat. It's okay
Mhm.
to admit to, but it still hasn't come full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously girls experience a different kind of pressure in the school system. You touched on it with social media as well. And I do want to come back to that because I look at when I was growing up, if there was bullying, it just stayed within school, or say if you were playing sports, maybe it stayed there, but at least you could go home and you didn't have to deal with it. Whereas now, with the way children are connected digitally, it follows you. And
Yes.
to your point, there's anonymous comments too. So there could be trolling going on. And if you're active on social media, you're experiencing this to a whole different level. Whereas in the past, that wasn't the case. How do you navigate that? I know you talked about parents perhaps being more involved, helping their children understand that what you're seeing on social media is often not real. The other thing is, like, now children are also connected to their idols, right? Or celebrities for that matter. I know for me, when I was growing up, I looked up to sport athletes. So the only way I had access to them was just watching the game on TV. But now you get to see, you get an inside view into their lives, and you see again, it's that sense of perfection, right? They've got the money, they've got the lifestyle, and if you're not measuring up to that, you start feeling like maybe your life isn't as great. And how do you navigate that with children? And because often parents don't know that's going on, unless they're really involved, or communicating with their children, or the parents themselves are dealing with stuff. And like you said, with inflation, perhaps financially, there's a lot of stress on parents. Maybe they're not as well versed in these things. So how do you manage this at a larger level, especially for our children growing up?
This is a tough one. This is a tough one. And this goes back to why are kids on social media 100% of the time they're awake? Our kids are involved with social media. I've even had one of our kids text me in the same room where we're sitting instead of communicating with me directly. Yeah. And when the kids go to school, they bring out their phones. Everyone's on their phone 100% of the time. You don't want to miss anything. You have a feeling that if you don't stay on your phone, you'll miss something. And so that's so again, as you mentioned, you're constantly bombarded by these feelings that you're not adequate, if someone else is better than you, everyone else is better than you. And so what do? That's a tough one. That's a
Mhm.
tough one. Many of the teachers are taking the phones away and putting them in a basket when the kids enter the room and go to their class. I think parents need to be aware that maybe there should be a break in social media and put the phone away for a bit. I think getting back to the old-fashioned things about family get-togethers. We like to have dinners together. I think that's so important to have
Mhm.
for a family to have a time when they can get together and talk about things. And dinner time is one of those times. And that then you put the phone away because you don't need to be on the phone 100% of the time. And some of the parents are taking the phones away for a certain number of hours a day. That's hard, but that can be done.
Mhm.
Um, we like to take walks with the kids so that we get to know where they're at, and they put their phones away. Then we've got a little, about a half-mile circle that we walk in the neighborhood, and you can get a lot of information from a child when you talk with them and they put their phone away and the social media is not bombarding them. And when when you first see a kid coming home from school, the frequent conversation is, "How was school today?" "Oh, just fine." "What'd you do?" "Nothing." That goes. That's a standard conversation. But when you go for a walk, things come out that
Yep.
are important, and you take them away from their phone for a little bit. So I think those are the important things. But again, we're also busy. We're trying to work. We're trying to make a living, and it's hard for parents these days to pay as much attention to their kids as they'd like to. It's
Mhm.
just the fact of life that they're tired, they're stressed, and it reflects on the whole family and the whole society.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it is hard because as we touched on earlier, there's an aspect of peer pressure too, right? So if the children's friends are always on their phone or they have phones, then it's hard to navigate that situation as a parent trying to minimize their screen time. But I do appreciate walks can be powerful because I think, and it works in a therapy setting too, where you're attacking the problem together. I find walks with my son are really enjoyable because he's just keeps talking and he doesn't have his phone or a phone to worry about. So those are some little things we can do as parents for sure to be a bit more involved and understand what's going on in their lives as much as are willing to share because that's also tough. I know for me personally, growing up, there's a lot of things I didn't feel comfortable sharing with my parents just out of fear. um, it's making sure that communication is there and it's two-way communication and parents are being mindful of how sometimes they see things and how that can be interpreted by children as well, especially in the adolescent years because children get a lot more sensitive with some of the changes they're going through as well.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah.
So now shifting over to some of the things you've talked about that can be beneficial for children, and we talked about a sense of purpose. This is a tough one because I see a lot of adults who struggle with this and they can spend their whole lives trying to figure out what their purpose in life is if they ever even get to that point of asking. I know for me at the age of 30 I started wondering, okay, what's my purpose here in life, and that evolves as well. But how do you work with children to get them to start thinking that way and start to think about, okay, why am I here? What purpose am I serving?
That's a good question. There are a number of studies that have found that purpose makes a huge difference in terms of depression. I'll mention a couple studies before I go on with other specifics. There's a MIDAS study. 7,000 people were interviewed from the National Institutes of Mental Health, and they found that purpose made a huge difference in their mental health. People that had a purpose had much lower incidences of depression and psychiatric illnesses. Another study from the Journal of Clinical Psychology, they analyzed 66,000 people, and they found a significant association with lower rates of depression in people that had a purpose. What is a purpose? The psychiatric associations define a purpose as your passion that then becomes your goal, and then part of that is using that purpose to help others or help other organizations or something else. So that's what we're talking about with a purpose. And how do you get kids to find their purpose? You look for a passion, what the kid loves to do. And it's very interesting when I interview the children that I admit to the psych units, I'll always ask, what do you like to do? What's your hot button? What's your passion? Everyone has an interest. Writing, taking care of animals, playing the piano, football, whatever. And I will frequently say to them, what do your parents know about your purpose and your passion? And they frequently will say, no, they haven't gone through that. They haven't worked it out with their parents. So that's a big one. For the adults, we need to find what a child's passion is, because they all have something that they love. And then we need to pursue that. Let me give you an example. When I was a kid, I had lots of passions. One was collecting rocks. So I collected so many rocks that the drawers in my desk were breaking from the rocks. Then I moved on to hot air balloons. I thought hot air balloons were a real cool thing. So I devised a oil barrel that I cleaned out really well so it wouldn't catch on fire, put hot coals in there, got the vacuum cleaner, reversed the flow of the vacuum cleaner, blew it into the barrel, and then the hot air came out the other end, and I attached a weather balloon to that to see if I could get it to fly. My parents were very supportive of my crazy passions. They would take me around to hot air balloon festivals in the Midwest, and we had a lot of fun doing that as a family. And I think it taught me something. It taught me that you can work on a project and accomplish your goal. And so that's held up even to now, where like I said, I've written a couple books. It's hard to write a book, but the realization that I was taught from my parents that you can do things, just pursue your passion and you can get it accomplished, has helped me a great deal. So the idea then is talk to your child, or anyone that may be getting into trouble, find out what their passion is. Everyone has a passion for something, and then help them pursue that passion. And how do you do that? You maybe hook them up with a mentor, hook them up with a person that's an expert in the area. If they like animals, bring them to an animal shelter and see if they have a position available to have someone shovel the poop or whatever it is, and take care of the animals. If they like to write, have them start writing a blog or encourage their writing, because people are a little bit hesitant to display their talents. They're afraid that someone will criticize them. So we need to be encouraging to develop that passion. And then that becomes their purpose. And then we need to help them serve others. There was a guy, it's an interesting story. His name is Kevin Hines. Kevin has a history of depression. At age 19, he decided that he was going to end his life. So he had his father take him to one of the colleges in San Francisco, and there he took a bus to the Golden Gate Bridge. He said goodbye to his father, hugged him because he knew that he would never see him again. And then he got to the bridge. One of the tourists there asked him to take their picture. He did that, and then he jumped up on the railing and jumped off. That's a long distance down. I think it's 200 and some feet down. You are going pretty fast. He hit the water. Very few people survive that impact. He fractured a number of his vertebrae in his back, went down about 70 feet into the water, and then was waterlogged. He lost the ability to use his legs temporarily, and
Mhm.
so he came up. He was starting to sink and starting to drown, and then he saw a shark swimming around him. And he thought, "Oh my goodness! Now that I've done this, and I just realized that I didn't want to do this. Now
Mhm.
there's a shark that's going to be taking care of me." The shark happened to be a sea lion. He didn't realize that, and the sea lion, of all things, made circles underneath him and buoyed him up until the Coast Guard could get him. What an interesting
Yeah.
coincidence that was. And so Kevin then was hospitalized for quite a long time. He then realized that he didn't want to commit suicide, and he thought, I need a purpose. And his purpose then became talking and writing about mental illness for
Mhm.
kids. And he has become world famous now in his talks. He saved many lives of people that have gone through the same thing he has. So he's found his purpose, and he's no longer suffering from depression. He has a purpose in life, and that's what a purpose does. People wake up in the morning and want to do what they have a passion for, and that is so powerful. And it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't require mental health workers. 11 million people, it's estimated by the CDC, do not have access to mental health in this country. And it's probably more than that. And
Mhm.
mental health is expensive. There are very few psychiatrists and counselors around to take care of the huge burden of mental illness. So this is free. It just requires someone to take the kid aside for a little bit and help them pursue their passion and develop a purpose. And that's why I'm out promoting purpose as a potential cause for the epidemic of teen depression, because I think it works. And it's been shown in, like I said, multiple studies that it does make a difference
Mhm.
to prevent depression and also to treat. Now, I don't think that's the only answer. I think I pass out medications all the time. I do counseling. I see depressed kids and adults. So there are other things that that are effective, but this is one of the things that can help almost everyone.
Right. Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. And there's a couple of things I do want to expand on there. But first of all, I think one of the things you touched on that's deeply important because often parents will project their own views or dreams onto their children, and that can be problematic. So, what I'm hearing from you, and which makes total sense, is being fully supportive. And as you mentioned with your own story with your parents, with the hot air balloon, right? And they were fully supportive of it. So if the child is to find their passion, parents need to be supportive and show that they can also invest in that time for their child. That can help the child then find a sense of purpose. And it won't always be the same, right? It does evolve. As
Yes.
in your case, you were passionate about hot air balloons, but you're not doing that now. I don't know
You
if
know,
you do in your spare time, but right.
I saw a few crashes, and that kind of put a damper on my interest in hot air balloons.
Yeah. So just wanted to highlight that for parents as well. As much as they may think this is not going to be a career I want my child to take on, but it's the idea of them exploring their passion. And I think it allows them to also build confidence, and they can learn a lot of skills that they can continue to use as they grow older.
And not every many kids will have a most kids will have a passion for something, so, but some don't. And what does a parent or a guardian or a significant other do then? You help them explore lots of different things. You introduce them to writing, and introduce them to animals. Let's go to the zoo, or go to visit a vet and interview a vet to see what they do for a living. Frequently, you have to explore lots of different avenues to find a kid's passion, what turns them on. It requires some exploration, and sometimes it can be very simple. We've got I have now 13 grandkids in Phoenix and other couple parts of the country, and I'll never forget a couple of years ago I decided to take two of my younger boys fishing in Phoenix. Now, there aren't many fishing holes in Phoenix, as you can imagine. So we went to the Central Park, one of the Central Parks, and there's a little fishing hole. There's a water a pond there, and we got a couple of fishing poles and spent 2 hours casting, and no one got their ear hooked or any other body part. We hooked a bunch of trees and didn't catch a thing. And I thought, what a disappointment. Here I took these kids out. We were expecting to see at least one fish, and we didn't see anything. And I thought, what a waste of time. And then until one of the kids, about 2 years later, came up to me and said, Grampy, you know that fishing trip
Mhm.
we took a couple of years ago? And I said, yeah. And he said, that was the best time of my life.
Yeah.
Ever since then, they've liked fishing. They have an interest. So sometimes just a little thing like that can spark a passion. And so you never know. And it doesn't sometimes require an extended period of time or lots of your time to explore things. But sometimes it does. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've touched on it indirectly with social media. There's that sense of falling into a comparison mindset. So even when children are exploring a sense of purpose, it can often be easy to start comparing yourself. So I think as parents, it's also our job to remind them that they're unique and whatever gift they have is unique in itself. So avoiding that comparison piece or coaching them through it or guiding them through it can be helpful as well, because then they can easily fall into that trap as well.
Sure. The other thing that that we might mention is parents need to have a purpose too, because the kid will emulate the parent or the significant other or the guardian or whatever it is. And
Mhm.
so if parents don't have a purpose, then it's a lot less likely that the child will develop a purpose. So we need to work on what our purpose is. And looks like you found your purpose in podcasting. I have my present purpose is exploring and seeing what I can do to help with the epidemic of teen, especially young girl depression in this country. And purposes change. You're absolutely right when you mention that. You don't have to have the same purpose all the time, and you can have several purposes.
Mhm.
But it's important for the person taking care of a child to have a purpose themselves and to
Mhm.
have the child know what their purpose is.
Yeah. And I wonder if you've looked into the ADHD side of things too, because I feel like there's some overlap there as well, where children are, yeah, ADHD has become a huge issue too, and we're often
Yes.
medicating it. Whereas I think helping children also find a sense of purpose or passion with that in the ADHD side of things can help as well. That's been my experience in working with some of the adolescents or some of the literature I've come across. But I'm wondering if you've had similar instances.
Yes, yeah. Everyone's been diagnosed as ADHD. Everyone wants Ritalin or something these days, and having a sense of purpose and a direction does provide some some benefit. They people concentrate more, can focus a little bit better when they have a purpose, and
Mhm.
so that does help. It may not be the only solution or the complete solution, but it is helpful for that.
Mhm. And one question, just out of curiosity, and it's really helped me. And I also work in the addiction side, so it does tend to help people as well when we're talking about purpose. Is often connecting to a higher power, whatever that may be, because it varies for everyone. And for children, often it can be hard to comprehend what that means. But guiding them in that sense, having those conversations of a deeper spiritual connection, again, that can vary for people. I wonder if that can help as well. I know my son and I have a lot of conversations around that too, and often I have to be mindful of his limitations when it comes to that. But it does help to talk about those things and understand what our existence means, and if there's a deeper connection to be had for individuals.
Absolutely. My first book, Physicians Untold Stories, is a book about something that's higher than us. And I don't mention, I left it open to, it can be any religion,
Hmm.
but having a higher purpose is a purpose. And realizing that there's something else out there that's higher than us can be very rewarding. It can help with a depression when you know that there's something that loves us unconditionally and is more than we can see here on this earth. So that could be very helpful. And the problem is, in today's society, we're becoming more and more secular.
Hmm.
Religion is on the outs. People are many of the government edicts are against religion, and so I think that's a big problem today. And the census in churches is going down.
Hmm.
I think we're losing our interest in religion. So I think religion in general is incredibly helpful for overcoming and treating a depression.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is that set for adults. Actually, I see it that sense of nihilism creeps in when you feel like there's no meaning to your life. And I
Mhm.
think to your point, when you're able to connect to something bigger than yourself and build that connection, even within your community, your family, then you can start to see that no, there is something deeper here. There is a purpose for me here. And then that can help managing depression and overcoming it as well.
That's the ultimate purpose, realizing that there's something higher than us.
Yeah.
That's the overarching purpose of our lives, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Kolbaba, I know we've covered a lot of ground, but I do want to ask you if there's anything else we haven't touched on that you think is of value and we should emphasize further for children or even adults that are struggling with depression. I want to give you that opportunity right now as well.
Sure. I think my purpose, I think, is to encourage people to realize that finding your purpose is critical. And if you have kids, if you are friends with any neighborhood kids or anyone else, try to recognize people that are in trouble with the things that we talked about. And if you can help them find their purpose, that can be life saving. You can save a life. You can save a child's life by encouraging them to find their purpose. And it doesn't frequently require a lot of time or effort, but it can make a difference. So my encouragement to anyone listening would be help someone find their purpose and you could save a life.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's powerful. Thank you so much. I know you touched on your book, but what are some ways people can find your work, or if they wanted to speak to you or get a hold of you, if you wanted to share any of that, what are some ways people can do that?
Where I've got two books that I've done. They're both on Amazon and they can, and then lots of other sources, but Amazon's probably the easiest way to get my books. If they want to contact me, we've got a website for my latest book, Clara's Magic Garden. It's called clarasmagicgardenbook.com. And I'm in the phone book for Wheaton, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. And they can contact my office. And I'm happy to talk or share ideas or whatever.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me.
No, it was a pleasure and an honor to have you on. I'm just chuckling a little bit because we were talking about smartphones and then you mentioned phone books. So I don't know if anyone would know what a phone book is, but that was part of the challenge.
I'm available online. Yeah,
No, thank you so much, Dr. Kovaba. This was a honor to have you on, and I'll get the those studies that you mentioned as well from you and put that in the show notes as well.
that's great. Thanks so much.